call the Newport Beach study session for February 24th to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Webb is absent.
Okay. First item is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Daigle?
None.
Okay. Councilwoman Gardner?
Nothing.
Councilman Henn?
Nothing.
Councilman Rosansky?
Nothing, thank you.
Councilman Curry?
No items.
And I have none. Do you have anything to clarify, Councilman Webb? He has none. Okay, we can move on to the Green Task Force outreach plans.
Okay. I'll start with that. As you know, the council appointed a committee to work on a variety of issues, and we have met a number of times and have two areas we'd like to just briefly touch on today because we want to be sure that the council's comfortable with the direction we're going in, and we don't want to spend hours and hours and hours and then find that this isn't what you wanted at all. The first part of it is communication and outreach. What we found in talking with many residents is that they would like to do things. They would like to be a greener individual, but it's so hard to find information. The city, for example, at this point doesn't have a lot of information. So we have a subcommittee, a communications subcommittee, and they've met with our information officer to talk about eventually having information on the website so that you could go and find out general information. They've contacted student groups because students, of course, are always such good sources of enthusiasm, and encouraging them to do, for example, science projects on that. Developing a speakers bureau to go out to homeowners associations and that sort of thing. And eventually to have a really good set of information. This is something that the city of Santa Monica produces. That if you're interested in permeable pavement, you can go in and they have something for you. Now, ours will be more web-based, more we can get away from paper. But that's what the communication area is about. The second area is to look at this new law that's coming down. And what we will be doing eventually is coming to you with ideas, perhaps, because we're not there yet, but are there areas where we would like to see Newport exceed the standards set by the state? And is there an incentive program that we would like to incorporate? We don't know yet, so we're not ready to talk about that. What we did want to do is to provide information for residents and everybody else on this new law, and I would like to turn this over at this point to someone who has spent so much time. I really cannot compliment him enough because you talk about going above and beyond the pale. He has done that, spent so many hours on this particular project, and I'd like him to discuss a little bit about what we've been doing. Brian Jeanette.
Nancy, thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Funny, being green is something that's near to my heart. I helped establish the Title 24 codes back in the late 70s, and it's been something that I've been involved in literally since college. And so having the opportunity to jump on board with Nancy and a really great group of people on the task force to bring Newport Beach into today's thinking about conserving energy, sustainability, et cetera, is kind of a treat for me. So it's something that I do not lightly at all, but with a lot of vigor. And I have a staff at the office that's been very helpful in this. But what we're trying to do, as Nancy was mentioning, is really develop a set of guidelines that can be utilized by anybody in any community. It's the kind of thing that we do with our drawings when we put them together and submit them to the city. But we're looking at ways to establish guidelines, and if you've had a chance to look at our first draft, a set of guidelines that tells you if you want to be green, what does it mean? Is it sustainability? Is it recycling materials? Is it energy conservation or water conservation? Or is it just the way you live? Composting materials and things like this. And we get into some very esoteric planning and architectural criteria, as well as if you want to water your lawn, what's a good way to do that too? And these things blend in with Newport Beach's best methods for doing construction, cleaning the water before it hits the bay, And so it's really become an educational tool. But I've kind of designed the format at this point to start educating people. Firstly, are they interested? And then driving it ultimately to a set of rules that say this is how you get there. And in fact, when the California Green Building Standards, which have gone into effect the first of this month, take over and start to be implemented in 6 months in June, people will kind of be able to look at that and say, okay, I can ultimately get so many lead points, which is the criteria that most cities are dealing with today when you look at energy conservation in the building environment. And so it talks about what you can do, how you can do it, where you can get this material, and ultimately, in fact, I have for Nancy a copy of the resource guide now that we put together that actually goes into listing companies that deal specifically with, if you want to recycle, who do you go to? And most importantly, is we're tuning it to Newport Beach, which obviously brings in Orange County, but it's something that can be, anybody could look at in Newport and say, all right, I want to recycle, or as you have just recently done, you have a lot of computer equipment or things like that you want to recycle or get rid of, you have a program to do that. This needs to kind of tune into the residents in Newport. And so that's the direction we're taking with it, and I think hopefully the council will agree that this is the guidance that makes sense, and using the websites and other types of communications to the neighborhoods is a very important way of getting this out there. And I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
You left out all the good stuff. If you look at the page 2 of your handout, we didn't give them the whole thing because we're saving paper, of course. But what Brian has done, which I think is so important in this effort, is we've taken each of the areas the state is talking about, but we've gone beyond just this is what you have to do. There's a description, an application, and then, very important, the benefit. This is why you would want to do it. Now, remember, many things that the state is going to, in their law, they're optional. You don't have to do all the things that they're going to put out there. But we want to encourage people to do as many things as they want. So by stressing the benefit of it, they can look at this and be educated and focus on the things that they want to do. What we plan for this is that it would be something that would be a handout. Probably because of it's going to be fairly long, whether we would do a brochure, a colorful brochure, or whether we would just have a very small piece that would then refer people to the website where they could have all the material, that would be worked out. But what I thought the committee felt was very important that you see the way we've sort of blown this thing up as far as these areas, and if that's a comfortable direction. Because as I say, we can spend many more hours developing this and refining it, but if this is something that the council as a whole says, well, I don't know why we need it, then we're going to have to look at a different area. So.
Councilwoman Daigle?
Councilwoman, how about if you walk us through number 5, just so you can kind of demonstrate to us how this works, as an example?
The water quality. Brian?
Certainly. Number 5 talks about protecting water quality by using different types of landscape features. And the description is designing landscapes to allow irrigation and stormwater to soak within the soil and recharge the soil. And as Nancy was mentioning earlier, the permeability issue. In some communities, I won't name them at this point, they look for a permeability standard to make sure that within your own property you have X percentage of water from the rain or from irrigation that will soak into the ground, obviously recharging the water table. And so what we then do is talk about what it means with the application using permeable paving. And there are numerous types of concrete paving now that will allow water to percolate right through it, as well as other types of DG materials and things like this. The benefits in doing that, we're trying to say, okay, this is what you get out of it when you do that. This is what you're doing to help not only clean the water source, but to help the environment. And then the resources at the bottom talks about the codes that will be implementing these types of things, as well as the best management practices that we're all very familiar with now in the built environment. And then ultimately what the lead points would be if you take this to a certain level. The next step would be to look at this and say, how many of these really are being covered by the code? And then how many of these that wouldn't be covered by the code could you do and get incentives by hurrying the plan check process or getting a yellow star from the mayor or something like this that says, hey, these guys are really doing a good job at it. And so we take every one of these. In fact, if you look at number 4, the construction site stormwater practices, it's a little bit more involved. But I tried to write this in such a way, it's a compilation of many cities, but simple people can look at it and get the idea really quickly. If they're really involved, they can get much, much more involved in the process. But each one kind of takes that same application and says, this is what we can do to make it better for us. Hope that answered your question, Leslie. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Rosansky?
So basically, the gist of this thing is voluntary, kind of a best practices manual to help people who want to be green or greener
Yes.
than they would normally.
It's voluntary today, Steve. As time goes on, some of these things will become mandatory.
Through the
will
state.
become part of the code.
Yeah.
The city will be adopting them, or you'll be, they've been adopted by the state. The California Green Building Standards have been adopted by the state February the 2nd, I believe it was, and now in the middle of June they go into implementation. But even then, they're voluntary. And so it's an opportunity for the city to say, yes, this is important, and let's either meet that or exceed that, or give you other opportunities.
But are you or Nancy, probably more importantly, suggesting that we make any of this mandatory or just kind of pursue that voluntary path that the state's taken?
Well, Jay will be talking a lot about what we're going to have to do. But one, as I say, one of the things we would like to do is come back when we have this all together, look go over again what is being required by the state, and then see if there are areas where we feel that given, say, our location and everything, that we would like to see people exceed that. And there are so many different ways of encouraging that we're just beginning to explore those now.
So is that a maybe?
I mean, no, some of it will be mandatory. I mean, that's beyond, the state will make us
Well,
do
I
certain
guess-
things.
I
But
guess-
yes, we will be coming back and suggesting that there will be additional things that probably should be mandatory, but many things will be optional. Just something that, here's some information, and we encourage you to do these things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Hen?
So the work product here will become sponsored by the city of Newport Beach. You intend to turn it over to the city, and it's the city that will take.
Right, and that's why I want to be sure that the council is comfortable with it.
Okay, Councilman Curry?
Well, I want to commend Councilmember Gardner and her committee for this work, because I think it really begins to position the city of Newport Beach and its residents to take advantage of opportunities that are going to open up for these new initiatives and for, I think, what are going to be compelling economics as we go forward for people to want to be green. Let's take solar, for example. It costs on average about $30,000 to install solar panels, but you're eligible today to get an incentive from the utility companies that amounts to about $6,000. Along with that is a tax credit that works out to roughly about another $8,000 or $7,000. A new law in California allows you to finance these to go and voluntarily assess yourself on your tax bill to pay for them. And the new stimulus bill that passed a week ago tonight, or 2 weeks ago tonight, enables federal tax credit bonds to pay for it at an interest rate of about 3%. So there are tremendous incentives being put in the economy for people to go green. In October, 2,200 Californians signed up and paid cash for solar panels. Yeah. I think more and more Californians and more residents of Newport Beach are going to want to make these same choices, and it's incumbent upon us as leaders to have these choices available so that people can choose to do the right thing and save money. And I might add that the cost, once you have those incentives factored in, the savings on your energy makes the panels essentially free. So that's where our policy direction is going at the state and federal level, and we need to be lined up with that so our residents can take advantage of it.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilman Hen?
Well, I would just voice my support for the initiative that you've got here, complete support, actually. And again, as Councilman Curry did, to commend you for taking leadership on this.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank staff. We've been very lucky in having their wisdom helping us as well, so that we didn't, one of the things they stress, for example, is don't make Newport Beach too unique. You don't want to have a builder come in and have a whole new set of rules when they get to Newport Beach, and so we've tried to incorporate what we've learned from other communities. But we will bring something back that's a little bit more sophisticated the next go-around, but we want to be sure that we had your blessing. Thank you.
Councilman Zansky?
I'll just add, I support being green. I think we, should do our best, but I'll reserve my final judgment as to what is mandatory and what is voluntary.
Oh, absolutely. There'll be a lot, I think, when we get ready. If the committee comes back and suggests that we want to go beyond that, I think that we would want a lot of public comment and a lot of time to discuss that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Councilwoman Gardner, has there been any discussion as to what the relationship of this document is going to be to SB 375?
Yes, and that's where staff has been helpful, because one of the confusions has been with the points and everything, and how does that work as far as staff. And it's been interesting working because staff is getting up to speed on this as well. So we will be working. In fact, Jay will probably comment on that because I know he's going to talk a bit about the specifics.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mayor Sauch, members of council, Brian and Ms. Gardner outlined the requirements, and I have actually the standards. These are the green building standards. They're the first green building code in the nation adopted by the state of California. And they were published earlier this month. They're effective August 1st. These standards, although voluntary in nature, they will become mandatory January 1st, 2011. They apply to residential, schools, and hospitals. They do not apply to commercial buildings. The standards also talk about specifically exceeding the energy standards in place through two levels of 15% and 30%. However, the energy standards itself are upping up the ante effective August 1st also by exceeding the current standards 20%. So this will be accomplished because the Energy Commission, who is independently working than the Building Standards Commission in coming up with new energy standards that are more restrictive by 20% more. The standards generally are performance in nature, and they provide guidelines. They're deemed as absolutely minimum green building standards in any community. And the city can choose to modify them, as Councilmember Gardner and Mr. Jeanette pointed out, or can amend or add. Generally, we have to begin our adoption process in about late April, beginning of May, to be able to adopt these standards and comply with the law, even though they're voluntary. And that's when we have the opportunity to introduce whatever the task force and council wishes to do with these standards. There are some communities, for example, and the general tendency of several communities to come up with their own green ordinances that kind of stopped because now we have statewide standards. Some communities now are looking for opportunities to either accelerate the standards, the mandatory provisions, or increasing the percentages of compliance, or widening the applicability, for example, to commercial buildings, because these standards do not apply to commercial buildings. So these are some of the opportunities to legislate this code and adopt it by the city. However, there are other opportunities to add incentives and other benefits to basically encourage compliance or exceeding this, with the standards or exceeding them. So that's basically in a nutshell what we have to do. We're working with the task force, and we have staff attending and myself as well, and we're sort of trying to help out in the direction that you want to go.
And how are you working with stakeholders?
We generally we have not actually developed any specific Newport Beach guidelines other than what Brian presented. So we have not reached out to anybody yet, such as BIA or others. But in terms of the statewide, through our association, we had a Green Building Committee who actually worked with the agencies that developed these standards and offered a lot of insight and input. And even the Building Standards Commission is still seeking input to the next code cycle, because the next code cycle in and 10, that's when the standards become mandatory. So we have not, to answer your question, we have not done any outreach yet because we don't know what to outreach with. Yeah, right. Correct.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask Jay a question? This might be a good time to educate us a little bit, Jay, on, say, residential solar panels. I mean, normally to install solar panels, are there issues as far as structural calculations and whether the structure needs to be beefed up in order to accommodate that?
Sometimes there are issues depending on how old the building is. If the building is older than, say, 35 or 30 years ago, and the framing may not be adequate to support the added weight, the solar panels generally are concentrated in one area of the roof. They're south-facing. Otherwise, they'll be not useful. And when you concentrate extra mass or weight in one area, and the framing of the building is old, and some of the buildings or the homes in our community are facing views and have literally no walls, it's all open glass, it becomes a challenge. So what we try to do is work with the installers, and they're not used to that actually, in trying to make sure that when you add this weight and mass of the solar units on one side of the house, that doesn't impact the house structural system. The solar units will add, the arrays will add about 3 to 5 pounds per square foot. Some of the homes have been re-roofed twice, the older homes especially, which tend to have re-roofing, and they already are added weight of their roof layers, so it becomes critical. Newer homes, it's not an issue, but older homes is an issue.
Okay, any other questions of Jay? I have one. How does that green building code, how does that affect people that want to do some remodeling on their home? Is there certain thresholds where it's supposed to kick in?
There is no thresholds for remodeling. However, the Energy Commission is proposing new energy standards in late 2009, 2010, that will involve existing buildings, existing homes, and requirements at point of sale. So when you sell your house, you would have to install mandatory energy efficiency standards in the house, such as insulation, windows, lighting, switching, before you sell it. So it's coming down.
Who's going to regulate that?
Well, as usual, the state passed laws and local jurisdictions enforce them.
So you're talking about
Without
us getting
additional
involved
cost.
in every resale of every home in town?
Yeah, it's very tough standards. The Energy Commission believes that nothing is more important than energy.
Councilman Gardner?
Just, you said who's going to regulate that. In one of our Coastal Bay meetings, they were talking about a new landscape ordinance where I think that every landscape over a certain size has to have a certified landscape architect design it, and then a certified landscape architect sign off on it. And so, again, I mean, if the city is the one that signs off on things, we're going to have to be sure that we're staffed for that. And it's just the sort of thing that as I say,
Is that promoted by the Landscape Architects Board by any chance?
it sounds like it, doesn't it? Someone had a good lobby.
And the Unfunded Mandate Commission.
Okay, any other comments or questions of Jay? Okay, thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Is that the totality?
I'm sorry, we can't talk any longer.
Okay, does anyone from the public want to comment on this item? Okay.
Robin, do you have anything you want to say?
Okay, seeing no one, we'll take public comments on non-agenda items. Public comments? Okay, we're going to adjourn to closed session.
Mr. Mayor, before we do that, may I make the recommendation that you add something to your closed session agenda? We received, as you have on before you, a letter from the Council for the City of Irvine challenging our actions that are scheduled before you on the Hyatt project on grounds of the California Environmental Quality Act. In my opinion, that is a threat of litigation that justifies your taking this matter in closed session under Government Code Section 54956.9C. And I would like to recommend that you add this as a matter that came up after the posting of the agenda, must be dealt with prior to the next council meeting, and therefore would require a two-thirds vote of the council to add to your closed session agenda.
Okay,
Second.
okay, all in favor?
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Seeing nothing, we're now adjourned to closed session.